Back in March, I made some plans to bring some lessons to us from the book of Genesis. And so last week we talked about the creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Everything went well for a while until. And that until was until sin entered the world. This is a familiar story to us. It kind of has become to be sort of a quaint story in the minds of many people. And people kind of kid around about Eve eating the apple and things like that. And of course, the Bible doesn't say it was an apple. And it's a very, very serious story because it deals with not only with the entrance of sin into the world, but it deals with the principles upon which Satan attempts to gain our allegiance. And so today we want to look at not just the story, but we want to look at some of the, I think, very profound truths that this story carries with it that tells us something about how God works and how Satan works. What was the real sin in the Garden of Eden? Well, let me begin by saying the real sin was not just simply the eating of the apple. That is not what the real sin was. Not because it was not an apple, but because the whole thing is much more complex than that, but we don't give very much attention to it sometimes. So I want us to think in terms of the tool that Satan used and the tool that he uses today. By the way, Satan has a big box, but it has only one tool in it. And we're going to see what that tool is today. Then the second thing we want to talk about is the desire that we have to experiment with evil. And the third thing finally is about what is the real violation here that we need to be considering. Let's review the story very briefly. First of all, everything that God made was good. He tells us that when he had completed the creation, he said it was all very good. Now keep that in mind because that turns out to be a pivotal point in the story that's going to develop. God gave a directive to Adam and Eve. He says, in the midst of the garden, there is a tree that is called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God gave a directive that said, if you eat of this tree, you will die. Now, Satan came along. By the way, he is not called Satan in the Old Testament there, not at this point anyway. He is simply called the serpent. When we get over to Revelation, it talks about how the serpent really was the devil or Satan. Well, Satan had a message also. And his message was, you will not surely die. God said you will. Satan said you would not. Now, Satan used a threefold appeal here. Now, this is not his tool. This is the way he used his tool. Number one, he says, if you do what I say, you're going to, your eyes are going to be open. Now, there's an implication here that develops itself as we go along, and the whole thing is that God has put blinders on your eyes, Adam and Eve. God has withheld something from you so you don't see life clearly. We'll see how that worked out. Number two, he says, you will be like God. Wow, that's a good one, isn't it? Wouldn't you like to be like God? Oh, yeah, that turned out to be very attractive. But the question is, what does he really mean by this? And the third one is that your eyes will be open and you will know the difference between good and evil. Evil? What is that? Well, you see, there was no evil in the world yet. Adam and Eve had no idea of what evil was, and this is the appeal that comes from Satan. You're going to know not just good, which you see all around you, but there's a great world of evil out there. You're going to know something about that if you eat of this tree. Well, that's a challenge, isn't it? God is withholding something from me. Let's see how Eve responded to this thing. Number one, Eve saw that the fruit of this tree was very appealing. It was good for food. I would enjoy that. I like food. You do too. And we like good food. And so Eve saw this was good for food. It had a physical appeal to it. It was a beautiful fruit. I don't know what it was. The Bible doesn't say what kind of fruit it was, but it just says that it had an appeal to it. It was a beautiful fruit. And then the next thing was that it's desirable. This was Eve's response now. It's desirable that I be wise. And so Satan has said, if you eat of the tree, if you eat this fruit, you will be wise. Your blinders will be off. You will open your eyes, and you will know evil as well as good. I can't hardly wait to get to that evil. What in the world ever it is. I can imagine Eve saying something along this kind of a line. Well, now, what is the tool that I talked about a moment ago that Satan used? I said Satan has only one tool in his box, and that's true. And the Bible talks about that tool over and over and over. And that tool is what? It's deceit. That's the only way Satan can tempt us, is by deceiving us. Now, what is deceit? Well, deceit, basically, we use it in two different ways. Deceit sometimes we think of as, I didn't know, I didn't see, I didn't understand. And that is certainly deceit. But deceit basically is this. It's assigning a value to something when that value doesn't exist. That's the basis of deceit. And so I have a bill in my pocket, and well, let me tell you what happened the other day, by the way, about a bill. I went to pay at the checkout counter at a grocery store. I went to pay. I pulled out a $20 bill, and the clerk, looked up at it. And so I told the clerk, I said, it's perfectly good. I just finished making it myself. Well, of course, that was supposed to be a funny and that sort of thing. But the idea was, what if that had been a fake $20 bill, but they went ahead and accepted it anyway? Then they have been deceived. They have assigned $20 worth to that bill when it really did not exist. And that's what deceit really is. We'll see how this works itself into our lives, how it works itself into the life of Adam and Eve. Well, what does the Bible say about deceit? I went back and just looked up a number of places in the New Testament where this word is used. Let me just read a few of them. In Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 6, the Apostle Paul says, let no man deceive you with empty words. Empty words. Words that sound good, but words that are empty, meaningless, and maybe even harmful. Let no one deceive you with empty words. And again, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3, Paul says, do not let anyone deceive you in any way. And I wish I had looked this up, but I didn't. I don't know how many times the word deceive is used in the New Testament, but it's used in almost every book in the entire New Testament. The idea of deceit is very, very important. And then in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 7, he says, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever you sow, you're going to reap. He didn't say when you would reap it, how it would be, what kind of a produce it would present to you. But if you sow evil, He says you're going to reap evil. If you sow good, you're going to reap good. And so he says, don't be deceived. What does he carry? What is the idea here? Some people think, well, we can get away with it. Nobody will know about it. Only I am going to be affected by that. It's something that doesn't affect other people. Nobody else is going to suffer. So if I do it, that's okay. That's deceit. Because I am assigning a value to whatever my deed might be. I'm assigning a value to it, and that value doesn't exist. Hold up that $20 bill. If it's just a piece of paper that I made, it's worthless. And so Paul says, God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. Well, some say, I'll have it my way, or I will destroy. If I can't have my way on this, that, or the other, in the family, in the business, in the community, whatever it might be, if I don't get my way, I'm going to destroy. You'll see. I'm going to destroy it. It's kind of like the bumper sticker that I mentioned in the Bible class this morning. Bumper sticker says, I don't get mad, I get even. Well, that's the idea that's being presented here. If I don't get my way, I'll take my dollars and go home, and I will destroy whatever it is that has opposed me. Others will say, I'm doing this for the good of my family. When really deep down you know the person is doing it for his own enjoyment or his own good. But you see, deceit causes us to assign values that do not exist. That's what deceit really is. Sometimes people would do things in business, in church, in family, in community, all kinds of things like this. And they'll say, oh, well, that's for the good of the community. That's for the good of the family. That's for the good of the business or whatever it might be. And really, all of that time, they have a personal, selfish motive. It's what I want. The focus is on me. And so this is the idea. And this brings us to the next section here. Self-deception. Self-deception is, I read from an author who was a friend of mine many years ago. He's dead now. But he said this is the most insidious form of deceit. Well, let's see what the Bible says about some of this. 1 John chapter 1, verse 8. This is strange to us because we don't think in these terms, but there were some people in the days of John that did think in these terms. Here it is. If we claim that we are without sin. Now, I don't know anybody who is claiming that, but in the days of John, the Gnostics were making claims like this. If we claim we are without sins, it says we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. So it's possible for me to deceive myself. And if we go on in James chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, listen to this. If anyone considers himself to be religious, but he doesn't bridle his own tongue, his religion is worthless. Now, isn't that important to us? Sometimes if we say and advocate and argue for a certain thing, we don't bridle our tongues. James says, our religion is worthless. And he goes on and talks about this whole thing in the book of James about how important it is for us to control our tongues, what we say. Very important. Well, all of this that I've spoken of deals with the fact that deceit is a very, very dangerous concept. Some people don't like to talk about sin. Some people don't like to talk about deceit because these things get very close to us and somehow or another we're uncomfortable with such things. Satan convinces us that sometimes something has an important value when that value doesn't exist. Again, this is exactly what he did with Eve in the Garden of Eden. He convinced her that there was a value here when that value really didn't exist. So sometimes we act in good conscience. And you hear all the time, let your conscience be your guide. Oh no, folks, don't let your conscience be your guide. Why? Because conscience is what I believe is right, or what I believe is wrong. It doesn't have to do with the facts. It has to do with what I believe is right, or what I believe is wrong. So when I do something that I believe is right and is really wrong, my conscience doesn't hurt me. We'll see a little bit more about that in just a moment. When I do something, on the other hand, that is wrong, and I think it's I think it's all right, then again, my conscience doesn't hurt me. So, in acting in good conscience is not the test of what's right and wrong. Don't let your conscience be your guide, because your conscience is a creature of education. Your conscience is a creature of what you believe to be right or wrong, good or bad. Now, I mentioned to you a moment ago that this is the only tool that Satan has. I wish that everybody had been present Wednesday night, because I put up on the screen, that we were studying Psalm, I put up on the screen a creature with horns and a pitchfork in his hand, all red from head to toe, had a terrible, terrible face and a real ugly look on his face. Who is that? Who is it? The devil, people say. No, that's not the devil. If that was the devil, nobody would pay any attention to me. We'd be scared of it. Then I put up a picture of an angel. Oh, beautiful, that's so wonderful. And then I put a little statement that Paul made in 2 Corinthians, where he says, Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. You see, the devil doesn't make sin look bad. He makes it look good. It's fun. It's enjoyable. It brings happiness. It brings all kinds of good things to you. It has all kinds of rewards. An angel of light. And so that's what Paul says is taking place with this individual that we call Satan. Well, when I was teaching in Vienna, I asked a question in class one day: is evil fun? And there was a young man there. Immediately said, no, no, no. Evil is not fun. It has no reward. It's evil, it's bad, and so forth. Hey, that's not true. Believe me, evil is fun. You know it, and I know it. That's the reason that we're attracted to it, is because it looks so good to us. It's desirable. Nobody's going to find out. It's only between me and me that this is taking place. And so there are all kinds of ways that Satan tempts Eve. Now, let's for a moment go back and look at how Satan tempted Eve again. Your eyes will be open. Oh, wow, that sounds good, doesn't it? And so when we are tempted today, that's exactly what Satan is saying to us. You're going to experience something you haven't experienced before. You're going to know something you haven't known before. You're going to have fun you haven't had before. Your eyes will be open. You're going to be like God. How is that now, Satan? He says, you'll be like God. You'll know the good and evil. Oh, well, wait a minute now. Only good is in the world. I don't know what evil is. No, God's withholding some things from you, isn't he? Yeah. And that's what God does today. He withholds some things from us. He tells us to stay out of certain trouble. Stay out of certain things. Don't do certain things. He's withholding those things from us. He's saying, don't steal, don't kill, don't lie, don't cheat. Why? Well, because those things are evil. Well, when Adam and Eve experienced evil, something came into the world that they had never been aware of before. You'll be like God. You'll know the difference between good and evil. You'll know what the world of evil is really like. Well, what does all of this mean? I think that one of the big things in this whole story that's overlooked so frequently is something that we in the United States are especially vulnerable to. Autonomy, freedom. We like freedom, don't we? We enjoy freedom. We can say what we want to say. We can go where we want to go. We can do what we want to do. Why? Because we have freedom. That's exactly what Satan was telling Adam and Eve. You will have freedom. What did he mean by that? You'll have freedom from the restraints of God. You will have freedom from the things that God is forbidding you to do. And so this whole thing turned out to be a thing of deceit. The tree was called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now you only know good, then you'll know good and evil as well. And so the challenge that Satan presents to us and that Satan presented to Adam and Eve is exactly the same. You don't know how much fun this is. You don't know, well, as a matter of fact, you could be serving God by doing some of the things that I'm telling you to do. In Proverbs, there are a number of things that are applied to specific sins, but I want us to see how the principle applies much broader than that. For example, when Solomon is talking about a young man going to a prostitute, here's what Solomon said. But in the end, she is bitter as gall, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead to the grave. Well, that's the nature of sin. And so he goes on in another passage in the book of Proverbs also, where he's talking about those who linger long at the wine, drunkards. He says, do not gaze at the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, or when it goes down smoothly. Listen to this. In the end, it bites like a snake, and it is poison like a viper. That's the nature of sin generally. It bites like a snake. When I am through with sin, sin is not through with me. And that's the very thing that Solomon is speaking of here. Well, this thing of autonomy, this thing of freedom, can we be deceived about it? Listen to something that Paul said. Paul stood on trial, and when he looked steadfastly at the council, he says, I have stood before God in all good conscience until this day. Now, he made that statement. Paul, when you were persecuting the church, you had a clear conscience? Absolutely. Because he believed he was serving God. And in another statement very close to that one, he says, I verily thought that I ought to do many things contrary to the name of Jesus of Nazareth. In good conscience. What is the message here? Satan convinces us that evil is really good. Satan convinces us that destruction is really needed. Satan convinces us that it's only us. It's not going to hurt anybody. And folks, let me tell you something. When he gets us convinced of that, he's got us in the palm of his hand. He can do anything with us that he wants to, because he has convinced us that what he is advocating is religiously good. Paul, for example. It's religiously good. It's politically good. Paul was doing these things in reference to the salvation, really, of his own nation. And all of these things go together. So, you see, in the Garden of Eden, everything was okay until sin came into the world. Well, what about this experiencing enjoyment? All of us like to have fun. All of us like to enjoy. But God has placed some restrictions on our our joy and what we can indulge in and what we can't indulge in. He has placed restrictions on these things. For example, the things that Mike owns, I don't own. I have no right to go and take them. I have no right to go to someone else's wife and fall in love with her. I have no right to do a number of these things. Why? Because God says they are evil. And so someone says, I want freedom. In the United States, I am free for same-sex marriage. I am free homosexuality. I am free abortion. I am free in all of these things like this. And Satan is just saying, I got you. I've got you exactly where I want you. Because now you're assigning freedom, autonomy as the great thing. That's exactly what happened in the Garden of Eden. Do you want God to control you, or do you want to control your own life? And Eve said, I want to control my own life. You're not going to die. Control your own life. And this was the message that he brought. And so Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 3 and 4, he says, but I'm afraid that as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, your minds may somehow be led away from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ. Paul says, I'm afraid that that's what's going to happen to you. Why? Because you're willing to be deceived. You might even think what you're doing is for the good, like Paul thought. You might even think that what you're doing is harmless, only me. You might think nobody will ever find it out. And the devil is saying all of this time, I got you right where I want you. And so the sin of Adam and Eve is just like the sins of all the rest of us. It's the greatest tragedy in the history of humankind. It's based on deceit. The atonement of Christ is the only answer. Because no matter how much good I do, that doesn't cancel out any of the bad that I have done. And so this whole idea of a life of devotion to Christ is an idea that the Bible advocates so strongly, and he tells us that's the way to imitate God. Come tonight because we're going to talk about the imitation of God. If you're not a Christian this morning, you want the forgiveness of your sins. You want to become the child of God. And you are really willing to change your mind, to turn away in your mind and in your behavior, to turn away from sin, be buried with him in baptism, and raised to walk a new life. If that's your desire today, then we invite you to respond to the invitation. Let's stand together, please, while we sing.